My name is Brian Doremus. I'm the Speaker Outreach Director for the Georgetown Sustainable Oceans Alliance. I am excited to present to you today a preview of Racing Extinction. It's Picture Motion's newest environmental documentary. It's a visually stunning and thrilling film that exposes the human actions that are currently causing Earth's next mass extinction. Due to over-exploitation and neglect of our environment, especially of our oceans, tens of thousands of species are currently branded as endangered. It is even predicted that some species face the threat of being completely wiped out from our planet within the next few decades. Ultimately, this path towards mass extinction has no return. It will cause a complete change of the Earth as we know it today, and future generations will potentially never experience the biodiversity that we enjoy today. Now, in order to inspire you to take action against this impending crisis, I would like to present to you a preview of Racing Extinction.
What's happening now is unprecedented in Earth's history.
Why would we want to disrupt something that took billions of years to evolve?
We need to fight it on all fronts.
I think it's dawning on us now that this is the big one.
OPS is a group I formed. It uses covert operations to expose harmed and endangered species. We're doing an order here. One bottle cam. Right there's the lens. 2 buttonhole cameras.
Check 1, 2.
Oh, that's good. Just about everything endangered in the world is for sale in China.
Look at this stuff. Endangered, highly endangered, highly endangered.
The more illegal it is, the more you have to go to the back rooms.
We're definitely not welcome here.
Oh my gosh. There's things going on that are probably not safe to talk about.
Climate is controlled by the ocean.
And we're dumping so much carbon in the oceans it can't take it anymore.
We found this guy, Mr. Lee.
He's culling and processing whale sharks.
Nobody ever gotten a camera in there before.
We run into people with badges and uniforms, strip off all this stuff, throw it over a wall.
Is it the basking shark oil?
Jesus. This world is absolutely insane. Wildlife trade is second only to the drug market in the world. It's that lucrative. We need a getaway driver, and I knew one of the best.
I love it.
To create a heist, to hijack the world's attention.
I think we want to put in an order for a car today.
Excellent, we'll take one.
Blow the lid off this place, right?
There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet.
This may be the 6th.
When you're talking about losing all of nature, it's not a spectator sport anymore. Everybody has to become active somehow. The idea is to inspire people.
Imagery is very powerful.
If you can reach people, you can change them.
We can make this happen. We need people to understand it's worth doing.
People that have been in the business that don't even bother.
But better to light one candle than curse the darkness. There's so many people who sit back and say we're screwed. But you know what? That one candle, maybe someone else with a candle will find you. And I think that's where movements have started.
Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Picture Motion's Campaign Engagement Manager, Megan Ryan.
Hi there. Can you hear me? My name is Megan Ryan, and I am here with the engagement campaign for Racing Extinction, as you just saw. This film is the new documentary from the team that put together The Cove, which won the Academy Award a few years back. And as you can see, it's excellent. So the film premiered at Sundance Film Festival this year, and it was picked up by Discovery, which will allow us to have the broadest impact and reach possible. In September, it will be premiering at theaters throughout the United States, and come December, it will be broadcasted in 220 countries, all countries that Discovery Channel is available. To coincide with this launch, we're creating an engagement campaign that will allow audiences to get involved and to take action to protect species that are endangered and going extinct throughout the planet. We are currently working with Humane Society International, Humane Society US, Oceana and Sea Stewards to garner support for legislation that will hopefully bring about the ban of the trade of shark fins in Texas, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Vermont, an exciting initiative that we're working on right now. And every day we're updating our website with new initiatives and new ways for people to get involved. And if you're interested, you can go to the website, which is www.racingextinction.com, or you can text RACE, R-A-C-E, to 55755, and you'll get updates about what's happening in the campaign and ways that anyone here can get involved. So I will be around for the majority of the day, and if you're interested, please come up to me and talk to me about the campaign and what you can be doing with Racing Extinction. So that's it.
Good morning. My name is Mimi Troxel, and I am the Communications Director for the Georgetown Sustainable Oceans Alliance. Our next session will be on global fisheries and the challenges and solutions that they face today. The global ocean knows no borders, and its vastness makes it difficult to police. Thus, addressing this environmental crisis, which has depleted our oceans of its biodiversity and resources, requires international cooperation. The state of our fisheries is dire, but there is still hope. With international cooperation and innovative strategies and policies, we can replenish these vital resources. With this in mind, it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you the moderator for this panel, David Hogan, the Acting Director of the Office of Marine Conservation for U.S. Department of State.
Thank you very much. We have, I think, an excellent opportunity here to have some fruitful discussions about many of the issues. Some of the speakers that have preceded me have touched on those, and hopefully in our panel session today, we'll continue that discussion. As introduced, my job at the Department of State is to help coordinate foreign policy as it relates to conservation and management of living marine resources, primarily fish. We help negotiate the treaties and agreements that manage international fisheries. We help coordinate with other agencies of the government, working closely with NOAA and the Coast Guard and others to represent the interests and foreign policy objectives of the United States. Oceans is, I think, one of the areas where we have an absolutely clear mandate to work internationally, to foster international cooperation. The interests and the issues that we see as important transcend many of the political boundaries that we have established, whether geopolitically or philosophically. I think the fact that we can talk with countries about oceans and fisheries in ways that we cannot talk with those countries about other issues, the fact that we have been working with Cuba, for example, even preceding the recent change of policy, the fact that we've been in multilateral organizations with other countries that usually grace the front page of the Washington Post, demonstrates that our interests in conserving, managing, and in some ways protecting the ocean and making it better than it is today are not only national interests, they're international interests, and they're multi-generational interests. And the work that we've been doing over the past 20 years is work that needs to continue for the next 20 and 40 and 60. One of the reasons why it's a foreign policy issue is not only because of the need for international cooperation, but the way in which we look at common resource management, the way in which fish and seafood products figure into food security, the way in which scarcity causes conflict, all make this a multifaceted area of responsibility. It's not just negotiating treaties, but making sure that we have enough food for people to eat, enough resource for people to make a living, and enough sustainable and productive ecosystem out there to keep us alive. You've heard from Sylvia Earle and others the importance of the ocean to our daily lives. The importance of fish to our daily lives also cannot be discounted, and the need to manage them is truly a global responsibility. So I'm very happy and humbled to be here. I also need to thank Georgetown University. If it were not for the Model United Nations that Georgetown sponsored when I was a kid in high school, I would not have developed an interest in international relations, and I wouldn't be here after 20 years of working for the State Department. I'm very humbled to be the moderator for this panel. We have some excellent speakers representing a variety of very important areas. So today we're going to have on our panel Monica Medina from National Geographic. We're going to have Commander, excuse me, having worked in my office for 2 years, I can't believe I just stumbled over his name. We're going to have Commander Daniel Schaeffer from the U.S. Coast Guard. We're going to have Paul Doremus from the National Marine Fisheries Service, and Brett Jenks, the CEO of RARE. So with that, we'll invite the panel to come up and ask them to introduce themselves. Thank you. So we'll start first with Monica Medina.
Good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. I am particularly pleased because I'm Hoya. So it's great to be back at Georgetown University, a place that I got my start, and where I wouldn't be sitting in this chair today if it wasn't for the great education and all the opportunities I had at Georgetown. So Hoya Saxa. I currently work as the International Policy Director for National Geographic on ocean policy. I work on the Pristine Seas project. A couple people have mentioned it before. I want to also say how much I admire the work of both Sylvia Earle, our explorer in residence, and Maria Dominaki. They're an inspiration to me to keep working in this area because they have done so much, and I feel a responsibility to keep going. And I hope maybe with this talk will inspire more of you to feel the same way. I work on the Pristine Seas project. Our goal is to save the last wild places in the ocean. There are lots of reasons why we should do this, but because this panel focuses on fisheries, I thought I would talk at least a little bit about the blue economy and the importance of that. There was a study that came out just yesterday. The World Wildlife Fund did an incredible study on the value of the oceans. And if the oceans were a country, it would have the 7th largest economy in the world, and it's worth $24 trillion to the global economy. It's hard to even wrap your mind around how important that is. Fisheries are obviously a huge part of that. And the thing that people have talked about a little bit but haven't really focused on is the fact that fisheries and oceans in general are subject to the tragedy of the commons. Some of you may have heard of this philosophy or this notion that when something belongs to everyone, it belongs to no one. And that's one of the big problems with getting our arms around managing this huge economy, is that it's been a kind of winner-take-all, go for broke, get what you can environment where there hasn't been very much regulation. And now, in the last 50 years, we're starting to get to where we need to be in terms of controlling it. I just came back from the country of Palau, which is a tiny little country in the Pacific Ocean, and they've long had the philosophy of managing their ocean resources. It's something called the bull. It's a concept that they've often used in the course of their history, thousands of years of fishing, thousands of years of fishing practices. When they overfish or deplete a particular area, they call a bull, which means they stop fishing there. And they give nature a chance to replenish itself. And that's been sort of a humbling thing to watch up close with folks who still fish with hand lines and spears, that they would conceive of this concept. And so I think from my perspective, at least where I work now in Pristine Seas, the thing that we can do, that I'm working really hard to do, is to conserve some of these places, to make sure that we have large-scale marine reserves that can act as those kinds of regeneration zones for fisheries.
Thank you very much, Monica. Next, I'd like to ask Dr. Paul Doremus to introduce himself.
Thank you, David. I'm Paul Doremus. I'm the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Operations at the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's a great pleasure to be here. I do want to thank Georgetown University for sponsoring this event, the advisory committee that guided all the students who are involved in this, and especially Daniela, and all her efforts to take this from vision to reality. It's an impressive day that we have lined up here today. It's a great honor to be part of this panel and to follow from such spectacular opening presentations with Dr. Earle and Commissioner Dominaki. Unlike Commissioner Dominaki, I didn't have the good fortune of growing up in Crete. Instead, I grew up in New Jersey, South Jersey. And I'm here to tell you about the pristine ocean environmental conditions in the state of New Jersey. We've got just a few minutes for an introduction here, and I did want to start back then. When I was a teenager, I grew up in a small factory town on the shores of the Morris River, a tributary of the Delaware. And at the time, I grew up as a swimmer. I started swimming at the age of 6. We swam in Union Lake, and everybody said, "Oh, it's fine to swim in the lake, just don't kick up the mud. There's a bunch of arsenic in it." And I didn't need a PhD to know at that age that that wasn't a good thing. So my first science project was going upriver, taking some water tests around where there were some industrial sites, and then downstream. I confirmed my hypothesis and got the attention of a lot of people, and as a fairly young person was able to connect with local legislators or state legislators and get people to focus on what we now call point source pollution. It was a great opening to me. You know, this was a river. You didn't need to be within 10 feet of that thing to know you didn't want that water to touch your skin. And now, many years later, there is a Citizens United to protect the Morris River and its tributaries. The Morris River is now a national wild and scenic river. If you got on that river and paddled around, you would not believe you were in the state of New Jersey. It can be done. There was a question earlier, and this is a big part of my message to start. There are signs of success out there. We need to build on those. That level, that local level, that connection of people to place is where it starts. It's where it started for me. And I think the great message in what we heard this morning, and we have an opportunity to talk about here today, is scaling that up. We work at the national level. We're seeing a lot of success in our fisheries management. We've got a science-based process that's driven by statute, by this law called the Magnuson-Stephenson Act. We've got labs all around the country that informs the management regime. It's a very democratic process involving industry, involving communities, people, environmental NGOs, and involving the state governments that help us manage our fisheries, and we have seen progressive gains in fisheries over the years. From 2000 to today, we have brought 37 stocks from an overfished status to a sustainable status. It's that long, hard work that needs to be done. Talk about scaling up. We've got some global dimensions to discuss here today. There is no way that global demand with 7 billion people on the earth, as Dr. Earl pointed out, when you all are my age, there's going to be 9 billion people, about a 28% growth. Wild-sourced seafood cannot serve that population. We need to really think about how we grow food in the oceans. Aquaculture, we have right now mostly a fledgling industry. 90% of the food that we actually consume, the seafood in this country, is imported, and half of that is aquaculture sourced from foreign aquaculture production capabilities. We need to scale that up in the US. So it was a great pleasure to be here, and looking forward to carrying on some of these themes a bit further. And thank you again to the conference organizers for pulling this off. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dr. Doremus. Next, I'd like to ask Commander Daniel Schaeffer to introduce himself.
Thank you. Is it Dave? Good morning. I really want to thank you for allowing me to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, I was in the Coast Guard. I just completed a 27-year career with the Coast Guard. 3 weeks ago was my first day of terminal leave toward official retirement, so moving on to other things. And in my 27 years in the Coast Guard, about 20 of it has been involved with the enforcement of fisheries laws, regulations, both domestically and internationally. And for the last 8 years particularly, it has increasingly focused on efforts of the U.S. government and foreign governments in areas beyond just the U.S. EEZ, beyond our domestic fisheries. And I just want to start with a couple real quick comments, and I'll keep it really short. I have seen everything from small canoes to large factory processors. I have seen every type of fishing industry in this world. And I have been to communities who fish artisanally, and I've been to communities who rely upon industrial fishing as their well-being. And one thing I can tell you about fish is, yes, it's part of the marine environment, and that's the bigger picture, but for me, the focus is fish. I strongly believe that when you have conservation of fisheries resources, when you have sustainable fisheries resources, you can and will save the world one fish at a time. And I firmly believe that. And I say that because fish, as Dave put out, is not just about the environment. It's not just about preserving the fishery species, the marine species, environment. It is a security issue. It is a global security issue, not just for the U.S., for other nations. And I can point to several examples, one being, if you read the UN report on Somalia and the root cause of piracy, can trace itself back to fisheries. The mass migrations out of Africa into Europe from Senegal in the 2008-2009 timeframe went back to lack of fisheries resources in Senegalese. There are lots of examples where the lack of fisheries resource or traditional environment that feeds their population, has their employment fish from that population, have led to regional instability and thus a larger instability and larger issues for the global world as a whole. And I say, last thing I'll say is people always want to feed their families. People always want to have a way to work and provide for their families. You keep those two concepts in mind and link those to the marine environment and conservation efforts that we have, and you'll find that common interest in those communities who don't traditionally have a conservation mind and make them think in that direction, because it's not just conservation, it's their life. And I do believe with the efforts we all put together and moving in that direction, we can save this world one fish at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commander Schaeffer. I'd like to now introduce Brett Jenks, President and CEO of RARE. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here as an alum of the Georgetown Business School. I'm a proud alum. I never got to study in this wonderful building. We were down there in the former car barn where they used to keep all the DC trolleys. Not quite at the turn of the century, but pretty close thereafter. But it's great to be here. And it's great to see a student-led effort that brings out folks like Sylvia Earle and Maria Domenacchi and others on stage at an event that they organized to talk about the ocean. With the Twitter feeds and the Facebook feeds, and I knew more about this event through Twitter than anything else. And so I was asked by Lauren, a student here who escorted me in here this morning, she said, so tell us what we millennials need to know. So I thought I'd introduce myself by my three-step old man's advice for the millennials. Step one is find your passion. It is probably the most important thing you'll ever do. If you find your passion, lots of other good things happen to you. Step two is find something you're really good at. Hopefully a couple things you're really good at. And gear those towards your passion, no matter what those things are. And step three is forgive yourself for the things you're not good at. This is a tough time to grow up in the United States. If you read the headlines, you hear really sad stories about the oceans, of course. But you also hear really sad stories about privileged kids who have tough upbringings because you're supposed to be a senator by 40 and a president by 50. You're supposed to have 2 PhDs before you turn 35. And then you're supposed to head off and make award-winning films and literally save the planet, thanks to the past 5 generations who must have been asleep at the wheel, because you're left with this incredible responsibility. So good luck, but that's my advice. I found my passion several different times over the course of the last 48 years of my life. The first was conservation. I volunteered to live and work in Costa Rica and fell madly in love with the opportunity that a kid from New Jersey had, bringing just some gumption and hard work and maybe a little bit of organizational ability to problems in communities I was living in Costa Rica. Eventually that led me to become, thankfully, the CEO of a great little organization called RARE. RARE is a global conservation organization, and we're pretty clear about what we're good at. It's inspiring local communities to live sustainably. We work to inspire people to change their behavior so they can protect their fish stocks, so they can protect their mangroves, where their water comes from, so they can farm more sustainably, because we all need to live more sustainably. And our mission is to inspire the change so that people and nature thrive. And once in a while we work with a little self-compassion to forgive ourselves for being not the biggest conservation group, not necessarily always the best fundraisers, but we certainly work hard at engaging the right people at the right time to make the kind of change that we're all talking about here. And I look forward to the conversation of sharing with you our killer app for ocean conservation.
Thanks very much, Brett. So I think the way we'll work on the panel here today is I'll have a couple of questions that I'll pose to the panel. We'll start with one of the panelists and invite the others to weigh in as appropriate. First, I'd like to start with Dr. Doremus. and ask him to maybe generally describe some of the major fishing issues, in particular issues of overfishing. We've seen in some fisheries some signs of success or at least progress. In other fisheries, we still see overfishing and overfished status for many of the stocks, both stocks that the United States relies on in international fisheries and stocks that others rely on. So I'd like to ask you how you and the Fisheries Service see the global landscape in terms of the status of important fish stocks.
Thank you, David. That's a big question. I don't believe I could do justice to it in a full day of discussions, but I'll try to be very brief. I do think, as I indicated in my opening comments, that we are on a good path in terms of the process that we have set up in the United States to drive towards sustainable fisheries. We've made a lot of progress over the years through the fundamental principles that are embedded in this very important statutory driver, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which lays out the standards that we use. There's 10 national standards that we are responsible by law for upholding. It's a science-driven process. It's participatory. The regional management councils across the United States are ultimately taking best available science, trying through a very democratic process to determine the catch levels that are sustainable. We enforce that from our statutory vantage point, and we have seen gradual, sustained progress towards rebuilt and sustainable fisheries. So I think we know how to make it work. It takes a long-term view. It takes a commitment to the science, to the ability to go out, to survey species, to understand ecosystem dynamics, to better predict what is going to happen to multiple species and that interact and depend upon each other. A lot of that science is new. To really understand ecosystem dynamics fully, we need to advance that more effectively. And I think when I talked about scaling it up earlier, the biggest challenge is to really move more aggressively internationally towards similar types of processes. We collaborate very closely, and we're very inspired by the efforts that Commissioner Damanaki took in her prior work to drive similar types of standards in the EU fishing practices. And we have just recently actually sharing a lot of practitioner experience with folks over in the EU and various countries that are trying to live up to these new standards that they've embodied over there. A lot of assistance to foreign countries, both for developing the capacity to manage effectively and also to enforce, as Commander Schaeffer is very, very aware of and can speak to as well. Those are the types of tools that we have, but ultimately it is, I think, shaped by the environment of people caring about the resource. And that's what I believe we heard a lot about this morning and are here to discuss today. Many of the communication channels that are available now to describe where we are and what we need to do to improve give a very powerful capability to influence how people think about and care about what it is that we do. We're in there trying to control the resource. We need to influence the people who care about it on a national and international basis to be able to really advance the ball on sustainable fisheries.
Thanks. I think I would like to echo that last part. One of the things that I've found and that the work that we do has demonstrated is that whether you're fishing for something, eating it, selling it, or oblivious to it, everyone has a stake in the health of the oceans, the health of the fish stocks, whether it's somebody on a cornfield in Iowa or somebody on a river in South Jersey. Absolutely. Clearly. I'd like to now ask Monica Medina about the role that large-scale protection can play in the health of international fisheries resources or national fisheries resources. Looking at the Pristine Seas initiative, taking into account the establishment and enlargement of marine protected areas by the United States, the establishment of marine protected areas by Pacific Island countries, for example. How do you see the willingness or the receptivity of the international community changing over time, particularly for governments where they have previously had strong representation by industry, who were not fans of marine protected areas, and where can we focus work internationally to continue to develop these kinds of areas that help restore marine ecosystems?
Great question. I think there are two different ways of going about this. There are the large-scale marine reserves that we've been working on. We've been working on at Nat Geo in places that are pretty isolated. Places like the Pacific remote islands, aptly named. I mean, they're really far away from most places. Creating large-scale marine reserves there is a great way to have huge buffer zones, huge regeneration zones for fisheries, for the large pelagic, migratory fish stocks. That's a fantastic thing that can be done by governments like ours, like the UK that just declared the Pitcairn Islands a marine reserve. But there's also a place for smaller scale marine reserves, and the work that RARE does is fantastic in a lot of countries. And I think there's a paradigm shift that's going to need to happen, and we're almost there, even in the US, where we need to sort of plan out our coastal area, our coastal marine areas into some places where we'll have small-scale reserves, and other places where we'll have fishing zones, and other places where there might be transportation routes or places set aside for tourism. The oceans aren't as bountiful as we used to think, or as they used to be, and as we think they are still. But if we plan, and if we use work like what RARE does with communities and national governments to create these kinds of zones, which I know is a scary word, but we're going to have to get used to it. I really hate to say this to the people like us. That seems like just a really radical idea, and it takes away from the notion of kind of fish and the oceans belonging to everyone. But really, if we don't create this kind of governance of our coastal oceans, we will continue to have these problems, and we'll probably lose a lot of the most valuable fish stocks for countries. So I think it's going to take a change in the paradigm, a sense that oceans need to be planned and their uses need to be planned, and there are some places that are appropriate to be kept from fishing or oil and gas or other maritime uses, so that they can be regenerative, and the spillover effects of those are very well documented, and the more we do of it, the more we can show that works. So it's a combination of large marine reserves in very isolated areas to help give the large pelagic species a chance to regenerate there. Not to mention that it helps with ocean acidification. It gives us a baseline so we know what these healthy places look like. It gives us a place to preserve those coral reefs. So the large marine reserves in largely isolated areas, and then a lot of smaller reserves paired with other kinds of ocean uses in ways that make sense in coastal zones.
Thank you very much. I'd like to pick up on one of the points you made with regard to the application not only on high seas international fish stocks, but also coastal fish stocks. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations recently developed guidelines for small-scale fisheries, and for the United States, small-scale fisheries might mean recreational angling or coastal pelagic fishermen in California, but for the rest of the world, small-scale fisheries is a much broader sector, and in fact, a much more important sector, particularly to developing coastal states. So I'd like to ask you, Brett, how you see the state of small-scale fisheries internationally, whether the international community is finally paying enough attention, or where we need to do more work as the United States as a leader and in the international community to make sure that these very important sources of protein for communities and livelihoods is getting the kind of conservation attention it deserves.
Great, be happy to. So not to throw terrible news on top of the bad news we've been hearing, but I will, just to make your day and get us started on the right trajectory. Small-scale fisheries are actually worse off than industrial fisheries, and we didn't really know this until a couple of years ago. If you look around the world and assume there's 10,000 fisheries, the cod is one fishery in New England. Let's say there's 10,000 fisheries around the world. We only really know what's happening. Really know what's happening with several hundred of them, literally a few hundred out of 10,000. Why? Because it's very expensive to count those fish. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of money to establish a baseline. And so it's been mostly guesswork. Even despite FAO's terrific work over the years, it's very tough for the Food and Agriculture Organization to get really good data on these small-scale fisheries. Technology's not there. Millennials can do a lot about that. There's a lot of innovation going on that will help us count fish cheaply in diverse areas. And so we're counting on your generation to solve the data poor stock assessment challenge. Once we can count the fish, though, and even just using algorithms and good science today, we know that small-scale fisheries are overfished to the tune of about 80%, right? We also know that roughly, depending on who you ask, 25 to 45% of the world's fish comes from small-scale fisheries. We also know, so just keep doing the ratio, we also know there's a billion of the world's poorest, most climate vulnerable people who depend on those small-scale fish stocks every day for their #1 source of animal protein. So we go to Whole Foods and we pick out a fish that we like, and hopefully it's got a green label by our friend Carl Safina or someone else, and we know that it's sustainably harvested. But most people are fishing literally boat to mouth, and they've seen over generations the absolute impoverishment of their local fisheries. So what do? We can't necessarily apply the same rules and regulations that we have in the United States. We generally have the rule of law, or Europe. And so we're going to need to be very creative about both national level policies and a great deal of heavy lifting community by community at the grassroots. That always sounds crazy and super expensive when you want the highest leverage bet, but it's inevitable. 1 billion people, 200 million local fishermen in countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, China, Southeast Asia, Mozambique, Madagascar, Brazil, even Chile, Peru. These are big fishing nations with lots of small-scale fishery dependence. So here's our killer app, and then I'll pass it back to you. And it's, what do we do to address the tragedy of the commons in small-scale fisheries? How do you regulate a body of water in front of a coastal community where there's been no rules, unless a local chieftain, like in Palau, over the last 100 years, has once in a while passed a taboo or closed down the fishery? Step one, three-part process. Step one is provide guaranteed and exclusive access to those local fishing communities so that they can be deputized to treat their ocean like an asset, to be managed, to be sustainably exploited, to feed themselves, but not to simply race, as they're doing today, to catch the last fish, because you have people from other communities, you have your cousins, and they just got a new motor, and now I've got to get out there earlier in the morning to catch those last few fish. That's the state of the world's fisheries on a small-scale basis. So step one, guaranteed exclusive access of some kind, with the responsibility that comes with that access to set aside part of those exclusive fishing zones as fish sanctuaries, or as the folks at Pristine Sea call them, fish banks, or no-take zones. And that's where the miracle happens. Studies have shown, 100 peer-reviewed journal articles have shown, on average, there's a 450% increase in fish populations inside those closures. And guess what? The fish move. So they swim out into these managed access areas, and in those areas, local fishermen are able to catch far more fish that they own the right to fish. This is somewhat controversial only because it's new, only because industrial fleets want no boundaries, and for millennia, fishermen have been able to fish wherever they want. But with 9 billion people, eventually, we have to change our behaviors. And so this is RARE's, along with a whole host of other partners, many of them in the room, our contribution to one way of addressing the small-scale fishery challenge. And the reason I took so much time to tell you that is simply because most of us in America spend all of our time thinking about the problem as being that of the industrial fleets and the trawlers. And it's not. And we need more help on that front.
So can I jump in and say, that was, you said much more eloquently what I was trying to say, Brett, and that was, there's one fundamental thing, and I'm not a scientist, so I will make it easy. Fish propagate. The thing about it is, if you manage fisheries, it doesn't take, I mean, for the larger species, it takes a little longer, but for the smaller species, the coastal species, it doesn't take generations to get them back. That's the thing that I always love about this, and that's what gives me hope, is that if people can see their way past the objection to this kind of a program where you have zones for not fishing and then zones for fishing, and you give people these ownership rights, completely revolutionary in the world of fishing. If you do it, they will come back. Unlike oil and gas, where we're just trying to slow down how fast we sip the last drops out of the, the glass, and it'll never come back, or we have to find something else to replace it. The fish come back. It's great. So if we just can manage our expectations, change the way we think about things, we can change the world. We can save the world one fish at a time.
Thanks very much, Monica. Whether we are establishing regimes for small-scale fisheries that incorporate tenure and access rights, whether as a developed country we have the Magnuson-Stevens Reauthorization Act and the legislation that sets up the standards for U.S. management, whether we even can work with international partners to establish large-scale marine protected areas or small-scale areas that reflect priorities in coastal zone management. We also understand that there is still a governance responsibility on the part of flag states and coastal states. Notwithstanding, for example, the recent task force established by President Obama to combat IUU fishing and seafood fraud, we still require, all of us, some steps to make sure that the rules we've established to conserve and manage these resources are respected. And that leads us to the question of enforcement of these rules. And I'd like to ask Commander Schaeffer to talk a little bit about his views on where we have seen some good solutions and where we see internationally some areas for improvement, whether it's the U.S. as a leader or working with our international partners. How can we make sure that the MPAs are not simply areas on paper? How can we make sure that the quotas and allocation and rights that we've established are being respected and not undermined by illegal fishing? So I'd like to open the floor to you, sir.
Thank you. Let me start out with the first question of a question is, what is enforcement? Everyone has their idea of what enforcement is. They look at the guy in the uniform, the police, the Navy, whoever it is. You're going out there with your airplanes, you're going out there with your boats, you're boarding the bad guys, you're dragging them into port, you're prosecuting them, that's the end of the game. That's a very old way of looking at enforcement. It's a very traditional way of looking at enforcement. And it's a way of looking at enforcement that needs to change. It's not the way that is successful. It is not the way that we're going to achieve success for enforcement. And why is enforcement important? Well, all the efforts we go through, all our conservation efforts we go through, the years of effort you put into a campaign, the years of effort you put into doing something productive to protect a region or an area, to establish the laws or governance structure, means absolutely nothing, nothing, if you can't enforce the rules and regulations you put into place. Who's going to stop them from doing something that breaks the law? If there's nothing to stop them, it's just not going to matter. So when you look at enforcement, it's generally looked at by most conservation organizations in the past, not so much in the future or present, as an afterthought. It's something that's just going to happen. Governance happens. It doesn't. Governance is difficult. Governance is extremely difficult, extremely expensive in a traditional sense and way of looking at things. What I would look at is, from my perspective, how things work around different parts of the world, things that you can do as a up-and-coming generation, things that you can do now and into the future, is to take a look at enforcement from a way that is different than non-traditional views, and I'll give you some examples. On the international level, we'll start with the large-scale fisheries because this can be scaled back down to whatever level you want to look at. The basis for enforcement are 4 pieces. You have to identify your threat, identify where it's at, how it's happening, and who it is. You have the means of detecting what that threat is, where it's at, what it's doing. You have to be able to do some sort of engagement with that threat, and you have to have some way of going through adjudication or prosecution of some sort. Now that sounds like what I just talked about for traditional enforcement, but there's other ways, and the European Union is a good example of how that has changed and a paradigm shift of what enforcement means. Do you have to board a vessel to enforce it? No. Why? Well, if you have laws in place, if you have government structures that allow you to take the identification of a vessel and what its activities are, and that be sufficient grounds for prosecution either within the domestic laws or even, here's another thought, under international norms, the mechanisms that are in place, international instruments that are in place allow for some sort of measure of adjudication on these vessels, regardless of whether you board them, regardless of whether they break domestic law, they still violate the international norms. And there are mechanisms in place, and I'm going to point to the EU mostly because they're most successful in this effort, to modify the behavior of those who would catch fish illegally, no matter where it would happen. If you're following news on Korea recently, for example, and the yellow card the EU gave to Korea, they went through massive reforms of their fisheries laws based upon the threat of them not having sufficient controls on their vessels and their citizens engaging in IUU fishing. Other parts of the world, not necessarily in any one particular place. It had an effect. What remains is seeing how they actually carry through with that, but they did make changes. Same thing with the Philippines and other areas. So and in short, I want to say that you have an opportunity as a generation to look at things anew. Do not look at things in the old way. Do not look at enforcement as the purview of the government alone. There are NGOs doing excellent work. There are non-government organizations, international government organizations. There are individuals doing enforcement work in different parts of the world at the local level, helping governments do things and helping fill gaps where governments cannot fill them, either by personnel resources, by sometimes money, and sometimes just a dedication of an individual who wants to do the right thing to fill those gaps. And that will solve the enforcement problem, is enough people want to do it and look at it in a different way and apply what is in place in ways that achieve the result, which is make it too expensive for illegal fishing to happen and prohibit them from doing it in the first place. That's what we're working toward. Please.
Oh, and I would just add, Commander, I think one of the things you're alluding to is sort of what we've seen in the United States work so well with police enforcement in the last year. In, for example, New York City in a certain period, where social norms were changed by very creative police enforcement efforts, starting with very small things like graffiti, or there's a number of very famous stories about behavior change in the subways of New York City that led to an easier ride for everybody. And so what we're seeing, whether it's in Mozambique, where you have South African NGOs working with local small-scale fisheries in Mozambique, bringing in all the high-tech drones and boats and training local enforcement staff, or in the Philippines, where you literally have a local husband and wife who have put out in the middle of their fish sanctuary a floating one-room lodge, and 24/7 someone from that community is out there, and they're just, with a pair of binoculars, scanning their fishery, scanning their no-take zone in order to protect the community's asset. And as soon as they see someone even thinking about fishing in their no-take zone, they break out the cell phone and they text ashore, and somebody intervenes. And that's simply because the community has decided on its own it's time to take care of themselves and take care of their resources. So there's going to be a lot of high-tech solutions that are really exciting. I think there's also this fundamental sense of changing social norms, which is what so many folks in your arena have done such a great job of in recent years.
Thanks, Brett. So mindful of the time, I'd like to turn this back into an engagement with you, the audience, and ask if there are any questions. I think we have some microphones set up on each side, so if anyone has any questions for the panel, please ask, and let's have a conversation about some of these things or other ideas you may have. And we'll go with whoever gets to a mic first. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Doremus. Could you please talk about government subsidies for fisheries, and what the scale of the subsidies in the United States, and what could you tell us about the subsidies in other countries, if you have a knowledge of them?
I cannot speak to specific subsidy programs really on a global basis. It has been a longstanding policy of multiple administrations and a great deal of collaboration through our trade policy community to try to draw down domestic subsidies for fishing, particularly where it adds capacity, and particularly where it adds capacity in overfished fisheries. We don't do that in the United States. There are some very, very small loan programs that help fishermen recapitalize in some industries, but most of that is oriented towards reducing capacity. So the big sensitivity is towards subsidies that add capacity, fishing fleet capacity, either on the high seas or in overfished areas. We've been working hard through international diplomacy and with the leadership of multiple administrations to try to encourage other countries to dial those back, but we have a long way to go with that.
Yes, ma'am.
To the panel in general, what strategies have you seen are most successful in engaging others to understand the importance of sustainable fisheries, especially to some who don't consider oceans priority at all? Whether it's an advocacy group trying to reach out to community, constituents, to a legislative body, or a government trying to protect its resources.
I'll say, because I have been in an NGO, I have been in the government, and now I'm in a media company, that I am blown away by the power of photos and pictures and media. And everyone with their smartphone is able to capture, when they see something happening, they're able to capture it and broadcast it to the world. And back at Palau, we premiered a film there this week on Earth Day, talking about the importance of the bull and of the sanctuary that the president of Palau is trying to get passed through his legislature. And there was nothing like the movie to persuade people. And I have tried to regulate, and I have tried to campaign as an NGO, but the power of the pictures is just phenomenal. So I would encourage all of you to be thinking about how to use technology, not just to count the fish, but maybe to capture some of these things as they happen and broadcast it to the world, because it really can inspire people.
I would just add that I think it's the critical question. I think when people understand a problem and when we're creative about inspiring people to adopt solutions, change happens. I think the question is, how do you use communications? And I think any decent marketer worth their salt would say, it all depends on who your market is and what it is you're trying to change. So with RARE, we specialize in community-based conservation campaigns. We call them pride campaigns because they're literally designed to instill a sense of civic pride in a community. The way Georgetown, everybody knows the bulldog, and you see the bulldog at the stadium, and you know to stand up and Hoya Saxa, right? But everybody has their own mascot. We actually use a lot of mascots, and it sort of looks funny the first time you see it, and you get a little uncomfortable when the mascot walks around, and then eventually you realize, hey, we're here to celebrate, and this is part of our identity. That literally helps to inspire people to think differently. Then you have, I got a phone call yesterday from the Minister of Fisheries of a country I will not name, who said, we are in panic mode and we need help. We want to pass, I'm going before the cabinet and I'm trying to pass a law in the next 3 weeks. We need all the fishermen out there with their signs right in front of the Capitol declaring their allegiance to this new vision that we've all developed together. And so we've got to come up with a specific marketing communications approach to meet that need over the next 3 weeks in another country. And so whether it's social media, bus loads of school kids, mascots, PR, or a documentary film that we happen to get the other members of the cabinet to watch, whatever it is, that's what we need to provide. We need to meet people where they are. I think that's the answer.
If I could add one really fast point. One of the wonderful things that I think is a connection for people, know what you eat. There's an enormous movement in this country and elsewhere towards local knowledge and knowledge about what's on the plate. Probably everybody here has had some seafood fairly recently. Do you know where it came from? Do you know if it came from a sustainably managed fishery? We don't do a lot of campaigns, or we're dominantly in the fisheries management business, but we put everything that we do out in the public domain to help people understand sustainable fisheries and what the fish that they're interested in consuming or have recently consumed is all about. Go to fishwatch.gov, and that's a good starting point.
Thanks. Here, please.
I was hoping you could speak a little bit to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and how that's influenced your interactions with member states, and how, if the U.S. were to become a party, that might affect your efforts.
You want to go on that one? Take the first one on that one.
Please go ahead.
I will leave the U.S. part out of it for now, but I can tell you that the provisions of the Law of the Sea have been extremely useful and beneficial to the efforts of enforcement of fisheries in the high seas in particular. We have relied upon various provisions of UNCLOS to do high seas dredge net enforcement in North Pacific and the Mediterranean back in the 90s. in the Western Pacific. There are all kinds of reasons, and I can give you, don't have the time right now, but I can tell you that UNCLOS has been extremely beneficial to our ability to project enforcement beyond our borders and help protect the global fishery stocks.
I will add to that in terms of the UN Convention on Law of the Sea and I have to say, as a personal matter, I hope the Senate eventually provides advice consent to ratification. While we're not a party to the law of the sea, in fisheries, we pretend that we are. It's customary international law. It provides the basis for us to negotiate the treaties and agreements that establish the regional fisheries organizations. It was the basis to negotiate the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which is an elaboration of the law of the sea. So we use it, we rely on it, and while there are many arguments as to why in other areas we need to become a party, we are pretending that we are already for fish stocks. Yes. Please, go ahead.
Hi, panelists. My question was, can y'all hear me, BT Dubs?
Yes. Please.
Yeah, okay, cool. My question was, do you think that managing and regulating the fisheries should be an individual country initiative or an international one? I know we're talking about it being like more so international, but what happens to the countries that do not have the funds or the means to regulate the fisheries on their own?
Well, you probably want to answer a big piece of that, but there are large international bodies, these regional fishery management organizations that help countries work together to deal with stocks that are basically wide-ranging, global pelagic stocks, things of that nature. So that's one mechanism. It's very difficult. Things like the Tuna Convention are one of our ways for handling those kinds of challenge. The ability to improve the ability of other countries with resource limitations to manage fish locally. I think that's where some of the innovations that you're directing through RARE to try to get to. There's provision of science, knowledge, but really community involvement that are key to it.
Yeah, I think the answer is definitely both. Both international collaboration, and it needs to, we're talking about the exclusive economic zones of all the countries of the world who are relevant to the conversation. Many of them are really working hard to figure out how to have sustainable fisheries to feed their people. I think there are some inherent challenges, though, that just go with the territory. One is, the fisheries ministries are often led by political appointees who might have no experience with fisheries whatsoever. They might have a real interest in learning how to manage fisheries sustainably. They might not. Often the legislation hasn't been updated in a long time, and because of that lack of data, it's unclear as to just how and what peril those fish stocks are. So, just to give you an example, I was in Mozambique on the beach in a community with the deputy minister of fisheries, who's in charge of all of the community development and fisheries work of the country. And he said, I've been doing this for 25 years. And I don't believe we have a solution right now. And what we're thinking about doing, back to the subsidy question of earlier, is we're thinking about making a huge investment in giving everybody bigger boats so they can get further offshore. Meanwhile, we just visited a community where the women in Pemba, in the north, are taking Gates Foundation provided mosquito nets, and they're overfishing the fry. They're fishing the last of the fry out of the mangroves. So these are the last of the, some of them are actually just adults and that small, but in many cases these are the fry. This is the last hope for some of these fisheries. And so now they want to subsidize further exploitation. This is as bad as it gets. And so he literally said, on the way back to the Capitol to meet with the minister, he said, I think it's time for us to change. I think we need a product like one that will regenerate our small-scale fisheries. So they have to do that. And then the hope is there's not enough philanthropy in the world to fix fisheries. But if philanthropy gets us started, if philanthropy gets the bright spots built, the models designed, that gives us reason for not just hope, but techniques that will work, then these governments can finance, with the help of international bodies, multilaterals, bilaterals, they should be able to finance in their own self-interest the replenishment of their fish stocks for their nations and for the rest of us.
So I think we have time for one more question before the agenda has us moving on. So we'll go back on this side, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Ana Sosa. I'm originally from Venezuela. So it's very inspiring to hear about the small-scale fisheries that you're talking about, just because I see it in my country where the government doesn't really pay attention to any of these regulations. There's no importance for that. So I'm a marine biologist as a background, and I really like the fact that you are getting this alliance together, so it really does make a difference. But my question is mainly for Mr. Jenks, is that how do you deal with these types of governments? How do you organize these small communities and also provide the information that they need?
It's a really good question. You know, it's changed a lot. Your generation is going to have a totally different understanding of what NGO was. When I first started my career, our hope, you know, I'm now in my early 70s, so this was 50 years ago, in my early 20s. I'm kidding. I hope you thought that was a joke. Okay, I'm too old for that joke now. So 25 years ago, we would hope not to get kicked out of a country as an NGO. We would hope to get into a country so that we could start working, and the goal was to be non-governmental. So we would work with communities, and we would try to build little bright spots, little glimmers of hope that would magically, with pixie dust, replicate along, you know, throughout the Cordillera or along the coastlines. And we did some great work, great little projects, but that propagation, that scaling, only happens if you bring in private sector partners and you bring in the government. And so we're all evolving. Private sector is getting more focused on sustainability. The government's getting more focused on these competing objectives for getting reelected, and social welfare, and economic welfare, and sustainability. So it's a confusing but very exciting time. We literally are in transition now to the point that we want our partners to be the fisheries ministry, the environment ministry, the finance ministry, fish buyers, other NGOs, the communities themselves. That is a seismic shift for NGOs in the way we want to hire people, the way we behave, the way we present ourselves. It's no longer about not saying anything to make sure we don't get kicked out, you know, of country X. It's how do we walk along the beach with those ministers and have them see the potential that we see, have them teach us what will be required to make it work, and how do we then help them build their own capacity? So in Mozambique, after a couple of years of discussion and before we've even launched the project, they want 15 of their staff, their ministry staff, to have dotted lines to rare staff to train them to be able to replicate this, you know, this, what we call this fish forever and vibrant oceans system along their coastline. But you guys are going to have a great opportunity to show up and start your careers in real, meaningful partnerships like that. Those were impossible 30 years ago.
I'd add, on top of the type of innovation that you're talking about, this organizational innovation, it's not just applicable in other countries, it's applicable here. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of what we're talking about in the upcoming panel is looking at ways that we can innovate organizationally and work across sectors to achieve some of these broader public objectives. It's not just the federal agencies, the state agencies that regulate the fisheries, it's a whole variety of inputs. We've been talking about many of them here. But I think a lot of the hope is for the future in areas where we can really expand responsible use of natural resources, not only in the ocean, elsewhere, is through these types of public-private partnerships. And I think many of the things that you're doing are really globally, as well as here, applicable.
Even in New Jersey.
Even in New Jersey.
All right, well, with that.
No politics in New Jersey, though.
I think before we end the session, I'll let you know that I think we have an upcoming video from the U.S. Ambassador to Sweden, Mark Brzezinski. And with that, I would like to thank very much the panelists for their discussion, their contribution. I'd like to thank you very much for being an audience for this conversation. And thank Georgetown and Danielle and the organizers for giving us this opportunity to connect with you all. So thank you very much.
Greetings, Georgetown University. Greetings from Stockholm, Sweden. I'm right here on the edge of the Baltic Sea in Northern Europe, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you as you begin your Sustainable Ocean Summit. As an ambassador, I am a passionate environmentalist. While in Sweden, I have done everything I can to symbolize and underline closeness between America and Sweden in the fight against climate change, and in particular on the future of the Arctic, given that Sweden, like America, is an Arctic country. Climate change has had and is having a devastating impact on the Arctic, resulting in massive melt of sea ice and warming of the conditions overall in the Arctic region. Of course, that impacts life in the Arctic, and we see that manifestly here in Sweden. One of the traditional cultures in Sweden, the Sami culture, much like our Native American culture and indigenous people, is threatened. Its way of life is threatened because they primarily subsist on reindeer herding, and the way warming has impacted ice cover in the winter has prevented reindeer from feeding during the winter. There's also an increase, for example, in the number of ticks and the extent of ticks way up north. There are parts of the north where ticks have never been. Just two examples of how climate change has impacted indigenous life in the high north of Sweden locally. But it also impacts us. The Arctic is like a refrigerator for the world, and as it warms, it impacts weather patterns, it results in storm surges, in droughts, and more. I don't know what generation will feel the maximum negative impact of this, but I suspect it'll be the generation after the next generation, and I'm so happy that you're hosting the summit that you are hosting now. It is timely for a serious conversation to be had on the sustainability of our oceans. And I say that not just as an ambassador, but because I work for a President Barack Obama, and for a Secretary of State, John Kerry, who are also profoundly committed to making our ocean ecosystems healthier and more sustainable. And this is not only about protecting biodiversity, it's also about global economics being done in a sustainable and in an environmentally friendly fashion. There is a way of doing this right and to kind of building progress together as a global community in a constructive and sustainable way. And I hope that your conference makes a real contribution to that discussion. Congratulations, Georgetown, for hosting this event. I wish you all the best, and if we can help you in any way from U.S. Embassy Stockholm, we'd love to. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Stupp, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Georgetown Sustainable Oceans Alliance. First of all, I would like to thank the panel for being here. That was an amazing talk that you gave us. And I would like to thank Ambassador Brzezinski for giving us this global call to action for our oceans. We are hoping that you are watching us right now through live webcasts and from Stockholm. So now I would like to invite all of you to lunch, which I bet you are very hungry and very excited for this, which will be served on the 4th floor in Fisher Colloquium. We would like to make sure that you know that this is an opportunity for you to network with Georgetown alum and industry professionals who can answer any of your questions and inform you on anything you need to know about their careers or their organizations. Also, please use this time to continue the ocean conversation and keep on sending out your tweets by using the hashtag SOS15 and to @GeorgetownSOA. Now, I hope you enjoy lunch, and we'll see you back here in an hour. Thank you.